Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we start Unit 6, Thomas Hobbes, and our topic is the covenant and the creation of the sovereign. Having discussed the conditions in the state of nature, Hobbes proceeds to the problem of creation of civil society. Sovereign authority is created out of a covenant among individuals. The sovereign himself stands outside the covenant. He is a beneficiary of the contract but not a party to it. Each man makes an agreement with every man in the following manner. I authorize and give up my rights of governing myself to this man, or to this assembly of men, on the condition that thou give up the right to him and authorize all his actions in like manner. This is the generation of that great Leviathan, or rather of that mortal God to which we owe, under the immortal God, our peace and defense. It is clear that no individual can surrender his right to self preservation, for this is precisely the raison d'etre of civil society. Hobbes makes a distinction between a contract and covenant. The mutual transferring of rights is that which men called contract. Then one of the contracts may deliver the thing contracted for on his part, and leave the other to perform his part at some determinate time after, and in the meantime be trusted, and then the contract on his part is called pact or covenant, or both parties make contract now to perform hereafter, in which cases he that is to perform in time to come. Being trusted, his performance is called keeping of promise or faith, and the failing of performance, if it be voluntary, violation of faith. Covenant is, on this view, a special kind of contract which implies trust and promise for future performance. Some writers like Samuel Purfondorff in the 17th century and commentators like Jean Hampton in our own time have expressed the view that this distinction is of no great philosophical importance. It only emphasizes the idea of trust and faithful keeping of promises, which Hobbes' arguments presuppose. In order to secure their escape from the state of nature, individuals renounce their natural rights to all things and institute by common consent a third person, or a body of persons, conferring all rights on him for enforcing the contract by using force and keeping them all in away, and authorizing all his actions as their own. That the sovereign is not a party to the covenant renders him free from having any obligation. This is sovereignty by institution. Apart from this, Hobbes also talks of sovereignty by acquisition or conquest. In this second form of creation of commonwealth, individuals acquiesce in the rule of the conqueror in exchanging for security and the victor, by implication, enters into a contract with vanquished to provide security in lieu of obedience. According to Hobbes, fear is no less a basis of obligation than free consent. In fact, covenant without the sword are mere words and of no strength to secure a man at all. The bonds of words are too weak to bridle men's ambition, avarice, anger, and other passions without the fear of some coercive power. But if it is only the fear of punishment that is the ultimate foundation of civil society, what purpose does the idea of contract serve? It is not a contract only in a Pickwickian sense. Some writers have made the concept of authorization rather than of contract the real basis of sovereign power. According to David Guthier, authorization rather than covenant is the dominant metaphor in Hobbes' political thought, and that authorization is a much more adequate and illuminating metaphor for the formation and discussion of political relationship. Jean Hampton, however, thinks that Guattard's interpretation would seem to make Hobbes into a king of wing and bring him nearer to Locke. Without entering into the details of this controversy, it is sufficient to note that a commonwealth, according to Hobbes, is one person of whose acts a great multitude, by mutual covenants one with another, have made themselves everyone the author, to the end he may use the strength and means of them all, as he shall think expedient for their peace and common defense. This commonwealth is the sovereign, the unity of all in one person. Next point is rights and duties of the sovereign. Sovereignty, according to Hobbes, is absolute, indivisible, inalienable, and perpetual. It is not limited either by the rights of the subjects or by customary and statutory law. Sovereign is of course obliged to act according to natural law, but he alone is the interpreter of this law, and none of his actions can be challenged on the ground that it is violative of reason and justice. Justice consists in acting in accordance with promises made, and the sovereign has made no promise. Hence, his actions cannot be called unjust or injurious. In relation to his subjects, the sovereign is always in the state of nature and enjoys all his natural rights. No one can complain that sovereign is acting wrongly because everybody has authorized him to act on his behalf. His actions are the actions of his subjects, and nobody can rightly complain against his own action. Sovereign has absolute right to declare war and make peace, to levy taxes and impose penalties. He is the ultimate source of all administrative, legislative, and judicial authority. Law, property speaking, is the command of the sovereign. That is, that person whose precept contains in it the reason of obedience. It is to every subject those rules which the Commonwealth has commanded him by word, writing, or other sufficient sign of the will to make use of for the distinction of right and wrong. Natural law or customs and conventions attain the status of law only when willing and ordained by the sovereign. Hobbes makes a radical departure from the medieval tradition and the position of Sir Edward Coke, who pleaded for the supremacy of common law as against the authority of both Parliament and the King. He brought to completion the process of subordinating the Church to the State, which was initiated by the Marsilio demarcation between temporal and spiritual powers, and swept aside the limitations of divine law, of constitutional law, and property rights that Bodin had imposed on his sovereign. Hobbes' theory was further developed by the analytical jurists of the 19th and 20th century. Not only John Austin and his school, but Kelson, Hurt, and many others positivists were at one with Hobbes in effecting a clean separation between law and morals. Liberty is the silence of law. In other words, a citizen is free to do or forbear what the sovereign has not commanded or forbidden. However, the command of the sovereign cannot annul the subject right to self-preservation. If a sovereign commands someone to kill himself, he is not bound to abide by it, or for the sole purpose of the establishment of civil society is the preservation of life. It is, of course, up to the sovereign to kill or not to kill a person in the interest of peace and security of the Commonwealth. But this does not imply that the subject himself is obliged to end his life or any other's life when ordered to do so by the sovereign. When, therefore, our refusal to obey frustrates the end for which sovereignty was ordained, then there is no liberty to refuse, otherwise, there is. In Hobbes, there is no general right to disobedience or rebellion. The authority of the sovereign is absolute and irrevocable. To resist him is to commit what may be called a performative contradiction. For the subjects have authorized all his actions as their own, and nobody can go against his own will. Moreover, to resist or disobey the sovereign is to opt for the state of nature where there is no right or wrong. However, it must be always remembered that the obligation of the subject is to the sovereign is understood to last as long and no longer than the power lasts by which he is able to protect them. For the right men have by nature to protect themselves when none else can protect them, can by no covenant be relinquished. Hence, if the sovereign fails to put down a rebellion and the rebels succeed in establishing their own regime and in giving the required security to their subjects, he ipso facto loses his legitimacy and the new regime becomes the real commonwealth. It was in this way that Hobbes sought to justify the rule of Oliver Cromwell. There can be no legitimate government without effective power to back it. As Sabine puts it, the aspiration for more justice and right seemed to him merely an intellectual confusion. Hatred of tyranny seemed mere dislike of a particular exercise of power, and enthusiasm for liberty seemed either sentimental, wavering, or outright hypocrisy. Now, the next point is the church and the state. The question of religious freedom and the relation between the church and the state figure prominently in the political thought of the 17th century, and Hobbes devotes almost half of the Leviathan to it. He does believe in freedom of religious belief and knows full well that in matter of conscience man cannot be coerced. But he says that the overt expression and practice of religion in the form of worship and propagation of faith are matters of public concern and come under the jurisdiction of the political sovereign. The belief in the church as the kingdom of the God he regarded as a cardinal error, as irrational and pernicious as the metaphysical notion of non-material substances which was responsible for much of the obscurantism and superstition in public life. His nominalist theory of knowledge made a clear sweep of all abstract notions of essences and ghosts, which were mere figments of imagination and which misled men into the kingdom of darkness and divided them into varying factions and groups. A church is nothing more than a corporation governed by commonwealth like any other association that comes under it. No profession of faith is lawful unless it is sanctioned by the sovereign. Hobbes was highly critical of papacy with its claim to exercise control over the subjects of a sovereign state in existential matter, and he ridiculed it as the ghost of the deceased Roman Empire sitting crowded upon the grave thereof. Here we want to wind up this lecture. Thank you so much for your attention.